Happy Wednesday late morning. This is Brent with Lykins Motorsports. We are finally getting to turn some wrenches on this 427 medium riser build. When I think the last video that involved this engine, when we did that video, we determined that our main and rod bearing clearances both were too tight. So I had crankshaft sent back to the crank grinder, and if you have a really good grinder, then you can tell him to do things like, I want 1/1000th of an inch taken off, and he did everything perfectly. And now our main and rod bearings are packed in there around 3/1000ths on each. So I've already went through and checked all those. If I had done it on camera and something would have been wrong, then it would have been a really short video. So I did a preemptive strike and went ahead and checked all the bearing clearances. So the crank has been cleaned and washed. The bearings have been wiped down. We're going to get our rear main seal in. We're going to drop this crankshaft in. All right, so this is our pond block. This is 4 250 bore and a 3/7/8 stroke. So we're pretty close to original 427 stuff. And it's got one of my custom hydraulic roller cams that are already sitting down in there. And we got some calico coated main bearings and rod bearings. And we've got our Felpro rear main seal half. You notice that it's got that little hook side on it. That's the sealing flange. You want that to face towards the front. And I always stick it down on one side. And what I'll come back and do is lube that up real good. If you start an engine with a dry seal, unless it's a Teflon seal, you will find a leak in short order. So most important thing, the sealing surface goes towards the front of the block. We're going to lube our bearings up with some Maxima assembly lube. I'm not an assembly lube snob. Basically, all you want to do is keep everything nice and lubricated while the engine is going together, because if you get it a little bit past halfway, then you're priming the oil pump just to check for issues and that sort of thing. And then you get a nice coat of oil all over everything. So your assembly lube doesn't really have to do much. I need to put more on that one. But we're just keeping it lubed up while we're turning things over. That's the important part. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop our 75-pound crank in here. I'm going to lube that rear main seal up here right now. We're going to drop that crankshaft in, and we're going to check our thrust clearance on this upper bearing shell only. Alright, so the reason I check it with the upper bearing first is sometimes you will catch discrepancies in how the block is machined, or even in the width of your thrust bearing halves if you do it this way. So just set your dial indicator up nice and parallel and square to the crank snout. And as I've told you in past videos, you don't want to manipulate, you don't want to bend anything, I guess, by, prying so hard that you tweak things. So you just want to take, you're basically just moving, you can hear it click back and forth. So spec on an FE is 4 to 10/1000ths, and we are at the upper end of the spec on this one with the upper bearing half in. And we'll see what it does with the cap side. It won't hurt anything. A little bit looser, especially on a stick car when people are mashing the clutch pedal down. It's a good thing, so that doesn't bother me in the least bit. We're going to get our cap side bearings lubed up, and we're going to start putting our caps on. Okay, so this is our cap, and you can tell I've got the seal oriented the correct way. Just stagger it the same amount, and they'll equalize when you put the cap on, but then we'll lube bearing up, lube our seal up, and a little bit of silicone on the cap side. Okay, so we got our mains all torqued with ARP lube, and I went ahead and checked our thrust bearing clearance, and it was about 1/1000th difference, so we're in good shape there. We're going to put our side bolts in and get those torqued. 110 and 55 is what I go with on the torque specs. And then once all that is in, we can give the crank a twirl, and then we can put our side seals in. And when I say side seals, I don't mean the little nasty rubber pieces. These cavities get filled with silicone, and that's what I use. Okay, so at this point everything should turn really freely. The degree of how freely it turns will be determined by what assembly lube you use. So if you use this kind of sticky, snotty stuff, then prepare for it to feel kind of sticky and snotty. If you just use motor oil, then it should have a little bit freer spinach. All right, so a lot of guys like to use the rubber side seals. Sometimes when you get in between factory blocks and aftermarket blocks, you get some scenarios where you're constantly working on those seals to get them to fit. This is what I prefer to do. Just fill it full of silicone, and until it starts to run out each side. And then I'll take a little dab and seal the front side of the cap as well. You don't want a big glob. You just want a nice coverage. I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. But anytime you use silicone, you don't want to get in the spot where you're using huge beads. It should be a pretty ginger usage. Okay, so double check the torque spec on the cam thrust plates. And again, we're using a steel thrust plate and a steel timing gear because we're using a steel camshaft. And we're going to be using fuel pump eccentric, a very thick hard washer, and an ARP camshaft bolt. My recommendation is to check the thread depth on every situation. So I'm going to measure from the bottom face of that eccentric to the end of this bolt, and I'm going to get my gears seated because it's not seated all the way, and then I'm going to measure from this point the depth of my bolt and make sure that I have adequate thread engagement inside the camshaft. Okay, a few things to make note of here. Our fuel pump eccentric, or the dowel, the cam dowel, I'll get it out here sooner or later. You get two lengths. One is for a two-piece eccentric or no eccentric, and then the longer one is for a one-piece eccentric. And you can see how it sticks through, but it doesn't stick past the eccentric face, so that the washer encapsulates that dowel pin. The bolt torques to 65 pound-feet. I have checked that these gears are in parallel planes. They're aligned. We are dot to dot. This is not straight up, okay? So if you go back to my, I don't know, well, I think I posted this on one of the forums. So let's take a quick second to go over some cam timing stuff. 2 degrees advance, 2 degrees retarded, neutral position. So a lot of guys make the mistake and say, my cam is installed straight up. This is not straight up. This is simply the dots meeting without any advance or retard added at the crank gear. I've heard a lot of engine builders get this wrong. Straight up means when the lobe separation angle equals your intake center line. So if this cam was, for instance, on a 112, to install it straight up means I have to degree it and put the intake center line at 112 as well. That will make your exhaust center line 112, and that's considered straight up. This is not straight up. This is just considered dot to dot. So this cam has an amount of advance built into it. I can't remember. I'll have to look at the cam card here in a minute when we degree the cam. But that's why we're putting it in at this neutral position, because it already has advance built into it. That's how I had it ground. So if I need to adjust it anymore, I can advance it, I can retard it. This is a good Coys billet timing set. I think I can go up to 8 degrees on it. So I can move it quite a bit. But that's the gist of it. I'm gonna got a good feel on timing set. We're gonna I've already wiped the bores out again. We're gonna get one piston and rod assembly in, and then we can check some things with that concerning the deck height, how far the piston is below the surface and that sort of thing. And then we can get our camshaft degreed. Okay, I just wanted to interject this. Check the camshaft in play. We're at 6 thousandths. We're good there. And we got a piston and rod in, and we'll start checking some measurements with this. All right, so I went ahead and degreed the camshaft. If you want to see how this is done, I have some other videos on my channel that you can review. But everything came in spot on, so I'm pleased with that. A couple other things that we need to do before we can continue on further is I need to check piston and valve clearance. So I'm going to go ahead and strip all this down so I can have some room to work, and we'll get a head gasket and a cylinder head and the lifters that we're going to use. Actually, no, we'll use a solid lifter, and we'll use some checking springs. But we'll check that, and then things will start going a little bit quicker. My goal is to get the short block done here pretty soon, and maybe the heads on, so we can order some push rods and determine if the intake manifold needs cut. But we're well on our way. All right, I know I skipped a few steps on camera, but here's the results of our piston and valve clearance. We got about 17 miles on the exhaust valve and probably 16 on the intake valve. So you can take a razor blade. I like using clay most of the time because it gives you an idea of how much radial clearance you have, which is almost as important as depth clearance. So if we look, we got about 120 thousandths radial on the intake side, and my goodness, it's just so far out that you can't even really, no use measuring it on the exhaust side. For depth, let's see if I can do two things at once here. Bonk. 319. 290. So that's with the head gasket and checking springs. So we'll probably end up with just a little bit less than that, but we still have so much clearance that it's not even a concern. So once again, I'm gonna get cleaned up, and since we're good on this, time to knock the other pistons in. All right, so we have an assembled short block, and I've already went through and reapplied ARP lube to all the rod bolts. I've went through and torqued those. I've checked our rod side clearance, which is the amount of space that you have in between the rod sides, obviously, and everything is in good shape everywhere. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to set my tripod back up, and I'm going to let you guys supervise as I go through and retorque all the mains and all the rods. Okay, the rod bolts torque at 64. And I'm going to put a paint mark on to, I usually mark them after I torque. I used to use a white paint marker, and what would happen is it would sling the paint off on the dyno, and then I would cut the oil filter apart, and I would see all these white flakes, and when you first see it, you're like, oh my goodness. But that's what it was. So I got tired of saying, oh my goodness, and I'm doing this now. All right, so that's all the rods, and I'm gonna get set back up and we'll do the mains. All right, we're going to 110. All right, you guys saw me do that. And we're gonna hit the sides at 55. That's all there is to it. Now we're going to flip it up, right side up. We'll put the timing cover on. Okay, so before the timing cover goes on, a couple of checklists. Make sure cam bolt is torqued. Everything behind the timing cover is sealed up. The thrust plate bolts are torqued. That's torqued. That is below surface. You got lubricant on your eccentric, on your chain. Just a paint layer thin application of silicone, and then the gasket goes on, and then we can get our timing cover on. I use one of these to center. It centers the timing cover by the seal housing in the timing cover, but that doesn't. So you could rotate the timing cover about this axis. So it needs to be centered here, and you also need to check where the pan rail is to make sure that everything's flush there. So let's get this timing cover on, and I think I'm about done for the day. Timing cover is on. We're gonna follow that up with a brand new steel balancer spacer. You need to lubricate the seal surface that goes inside the seal, and it doesn't hurt to put a little oil on the inside to help it slide on the crank snout. So we'll get that done, and then I'm feeling energized, so we may get the harmonic balancer on and the pointer on. All right, I think we're gonna call it quits. So got our Carter. This is an M6905 fuel pump. Supports a lot of horsepower, quite a bit more than what this engine will make. Power bond, harmonic balancer. ARP has been out of balancer bolts for ever. So this is a reproduction Ford balancer bolt. This is my new adjustable timing pointer. Works very slick. And I think we're done. I'm gonna call it quits. And I'll go ahead and post this video to the interwebs. And tomorrow we'll hit it again and probably get the oil pump and shaft and the oil pan on and get the heads on and get a lot more accomplished. But here's where we are. Not bad for about a half a day's work. Of course, all the hard stuff was already done. Pistons were on the rods. Bearings were torqued up and ready to check and all that stuff. But here it is. All right, guys. I will see you soon. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that so you don't miss out on the rest of the parts of this build assembly. Hit that like button. Talk to you all later.